Now we're going to look at cubes. What is confusing about cubes is that you can actually factor pluses and minuses for cubes. Either or is fine. Okay, but with squares, we can only do a difference of squares. So for cubes, pluses or minuses are fine. Let's see how we're going to do it. We'll have two things that are either added or subtracted together that are both cubes. And so what happens with cubes is it's going to be the only time we don't get a 2 and a 2. We'll get a 2, a binomial, times a 3-piece trinomial. So this is going to be bigger. It's not actually harder, just bigger. So what you'll do is you'll figure out what's been cubed in each piece. In this one, we've got an A that's cubed and a B that's cubed. So you'll start off very similar to what we did with squares. We'll start out with just an A and just a B. Okay. Then when we move under our trinomial, we'll start over and we'll look at just squaring whatever you have from that first piece. So if I square whatever was left on that first piece, it'll give us an A squared. And then at the end of the trinomial, I'll take a look at the last piece and square that, which will give me a B squared. Then for the term in the middle, that's where people usually run into issues. The term in the middle of the trinomial is taking both of the terms and multiplying them together. So the A times the B will give us an AB. And that's the pattern you're going to follow, whether or not there's a plus or a minus in the middle. What's going to happen with the plus or minus in the middle is what's going to determine all the signs in the two pieces on the right when you're factoring. So what's going to determine those signs is something called SOAP. And so the S will determine the first one, the O will determine the second one, and the AP in SOAP will determine the last sign. What does SOAP stand for? S stands for same. So the first sign should be the same as whatever you started out with. So if you start out with a plus, you should be putting a plus first. So what if the next one was the O, and so for the next term is opposite. So in this first example, I had a plus, so opposite would be a minus. The last sign here is AP. Always positive. So the AP is always positive. That means I'll always have a plus in that last position. So just to kind of point this out, also conversely, had I started out with a minus sign in the middle, then I would have had same, which would have been a minus, opposite, which would have been a plus, and last one would have still been a plus because it's always positive. But there's this pattern you can follow with these. So it is a little bit of memorization, but it's more pattern than anything. So let's take a look at A. So we've got an x cubed minus 64. So because we're looking at cubes, we're looking at SOAP. And how I know we're looking at cubes is because we're looking at exponents that are divisible by 3. So with cubes, it's a little bit bigger. We start out with 2 terms, then we move to a trinomial of 3 terms. So this is going to be bigger. But I still start off the same way. I need to figure out what's cubed in each piece. Well, there's an x that's cubed in the first piece. What is cubed or multiplied by itself 3 times is a 4. So I get my x and my 4 in my first piece. And remember, my pattern says now go back to the first piece for the start of your trinomial. You're going to square that first piece. So squaring that x gives me an x squared. Then doing the last piece on the trinomial says to take the last piece and square it. Well, squaring the 4, do the math. 4 squared is 16. Don't leave it as 4 squared. And then remember that the middle term is taking those 2 terms, both of them, and multiplying them. Well, x times 4 gives me a 4x. Now let's fill in our signs using our SOAP. Remember, SOAP says first term should be the same. Well, I start out with a minus, so it'll be the same, a minus. Next one is the opposite, so it should be a plus. Last one is AP, always positive, so that one's always going to be a plus. And that's it. What's nice about doing trinomials, trinomials, but cubes like this is you should almost never have to do anything after it. We're done. Don't try factoring out AC method using that trinomial at all. It's not going to factor. Just you're done. Let's take a look at B. In B, we've got 27x cubed plus 64y cubed. So we've got cubes again, because we see exponents that are divisible by 3. Remember, cubes is SOAP, which means we're going to have a binomial, 2 terms, times a trinomial, 3 terms. Okay, let's take a look. We've got 27x cubed. Well, there's a 3 that's cubed to get the 27 and an x that's cubed. You've also got a 64 that is going to be gotten by cubing 4, and the y is cubed, so we've got a y that's also been cubed. So our first pieces are just going to stay the same, the 3x and the 4y. Then you'll go back to your first term to get the first term of your trinomial, and you'll square the whole thing. Squaring the whole thing means you have to square the 3 and the x, which will get me 9x squared. Now the last piece of the trinomial means I need to take the last piece and square it. Squaring the 4 and the y gives me a 16y squared. Now for the middle piece, let's remind ourselves the middle piece is taking those two and multiplying them. So a 3x times a 4y is a 12xy. Then we have same, opposite, always, positive. Same would be a plus, opposite would be a minus, and always positive is another plus. And we're done. So it's just remembering and doing this pattern over and over and over again until you feel comfortable with it. Let's take a look at C. In C, we've got an 8x cubed minus 125, and we're again going to look to see if we can do cubes. Why? Because we have an exponent that's divisible by 3. Cubes is SOAP, means we've got a 2 term times a 3 term, a binomial times a trinomial. So we'd start off by saying what is cubed in each piece. Well, in the first piece, you're going to cube 2 to get 8, and an x to get x cubed. And to get the 125, you have to cube a 5, so we'll start off by keeping those the same, the 2x and the 5. Then remember the first piece in the trinomial means go back to the first piece and square the whole thing, meaning square the 2 and the x. Well, squaring the 2 gets me a 4. Squaring the x gets me an x squared. The last piece of the trinomial tells me to square the last piece, which means square the 5. Well, 5 squared is 25. Now, last thing that I need to do is get that middle term by multiplying my 2 terms together. The 2x times 5 actually gets me 10x. Then I can do my SOAP to figure out what all my signs are. Well, I had a minus, so SOAP says start out with the same, another minus. Then an opposite, which is a plus, and AP is always positive, so last one's always a plus, and that's it. That is my final factored answer. Let's take a look at D. In D, we've got 27x cubed plus y cubed. So let's see again. What's cubed in each piece? Well, in the first piece, we've got a 3 and an x that's cubed. And in the second piece, we've just got a y that's cubed. So we'll have, again, with SOAP, we've got a 2 term times a 3 term. We'll start out with staying the same, the 3x and the y. And in the second piece, we will start off by going back to the first piece and squaring it. Squaring the 3x means I have to square the 3 and the x. Well, squaring the 3 will get me 9. Squaring the x will get me x squared. Then squaring the y will get me a y squared. Then remember the middle term is to go back and multiply the 2 together. So the 3x times the y will get me 3xy. Then Doing the signs, I've got a plus. And so carrying that down, same. Then remember it's soap, same, so we'll do a plus first. Next one's opposite, minus. Last one, AP, always a positive, so always a plus. And that's my final answer.